sluggard. All right. We're glad that you guys are back with us. We are going to continue our series in Proverbs. This week we are talking about work. And as you can see, we've got a new face. Drew is the family pastor? Student pastor at Grand Avenue Christian Church in Carbondale, Illinois. So we're glad to have you and welcome you with us. So we'll dive right in. As I said, we're going to be talking about work today, and I think we'll start out with Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 11. Drew, would you care to read that for us?
Sure. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? Will you get up from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of your hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, a scarcity like an armed man, a troublemaker and a villain.
All right. So the author here is encouraging people to work hard and uses the ant as an example. So when you see, you see him say, observe the ant, check out her ways and be wise. What strikes you about that chunk?
I think the very idea of taking lessons from nature, of what you can pick up, I think it's a simple illustration as well, but also if you were to simply stop and watch how things happen, I think you do that again with Jesus in the New Testament when he's talking about, look at the birds, see how birds do it, then figure this out, and ants are diligent, and no matter how many times you mess up their little dwelling, they just go right back to building it back up.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I would do such a thing. I'm an ant activist.
That's good. That's good.
Ant rights.
You don't just go in and destroy an ant farm,
No,
Okay, good. I'm
wouldn't
glad to know that you're for them. So,
well, there's a sense, obviously, like the ants have a queen, but there's no one. There's a bit of self motivation happening within here. That it's not like the way it works within a structure of the ant colony and bee colony being a similar way that. Yes, you have a way that's like being supported and fed to that reproductive center, but that this idea is like you have your task and you must get it done and you must do it. And I think self-motivation is a big part of this as well when you talk about work and this if you've ever managed people or been in a position where you're doing that, like if you have to manage motivation, it just never ends well. Like you can only do that for a short period of time. Otherwise, all your efforts going into, you never really get anywhere because you're just having to motivate people all the time.
absolutely.
And I would just, to add to this illustration and stuff, he says, look at the ant, how it works and stuff. The ant is doing what it was created to do. It's fulfilling its purpose that God has given it. And a lot of times when we think about work, we think of it in a negative sense. Oh man, I can't wait, to go to work, or I can't stand work and stuff. And there is a sense that work and what we experience here on earth is difficult because it's a part of the curse that we see in Genesis chapter 3, that we will work and toil. But we can look at the very beginning of Genesis and we can see, we know that Adam and Eve, Adam worked in the garden before there was sin.
And it was good. Yeah.
And it was good. And, we can know from Scripture that we were created to work. There's that's part of like how God creates, because God creates in His image, and so therefore God is one who works, who acts, and therefore we who are made in His image, are made to do the same thing, and so there's benefit in the work and things that we do, where we're fulfilling what the role that God has given us here on earth. I think of the cultural mandate that God gives us Genesis 2, go and be fruitful, fill the earth, subdue it. And our work that we do is part of fulfilling that.
Absolutely. And I think that's that idea of a job. It's, we should work hard at whatever we do because everybody has a different calling. Everybody has a different job that they go to, 9 to 5, whether it's working in a coal mine, being a farmer, making burgers at McDonald's, whatever it is, we have a job. And yet above all of that, our sole job, our sole work as Christians is glorify God. When Paul was talking about life itself, he said, if I live, it's for Christ. His job was to glorify Christ, and if he died, it was gain because he was with Christ. So I think as we can look at this in two different ways, is there's the physical side of whatever you're doing, do in the name of the Lord, do it all for his glory, work hard, but then there's also the side of, as a Christian, our work is to do God's work. What is his will for our life? And I think it's the connection and kind of the tenacity that we should be going after work as Christians that matters the most. In fact, Proverbs 10, verses 4 and 5. Joey, would you care to read that? I think that sheds a little light on that.
A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame.
Okay, so a slack hand. I have poor is he who works with a negligent hand. You guys have any other translations?
Lazy.
Lazy. Okay, all right. So, kind of this goes along with what was said there in chapter 6 of you sluggard. I think Solomon does that several times there in Proverbs where he talks about, there are folks that they're just not working, they're not getting after it. And whether that's physical work or the work of the kingdom, they're just existing. So when you hear this, he who works with a slack hand, a lazy hand, a negligent hand, they're not doing much, but it's the diligent who become rich.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think when he's talking about wealth, is he talking about monetary gains?
I certainly don't think that's all of it. I think kind of as I said before, that to me, you can look at these proverbs and there's definitely the physical, material wealth or, whatever, but there's also the spiritual side of things. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget is people look at this and they say, well, if I work hard, I'm going to get rich. And you might not have a massive bank account, but you could certainly be blessed in the Lord.
And I would say that there's a distinction or there that has to be made. It's not like, again, we think get rich quick schemes. Pardon me. Or we think abundance of wealth rather than like wealth being like there is enough and more than enough in extent, but not like we want millions more. We want like the total security more. But there's a sense in which like diligence, what that provides is a consistent sense of wealth and a head of it. Now again, like too much diligence in the fact that you can just drive that into the ground. But there's that sense that again, like the example used here is when it's summer, when it's summer and when it's harvest season, with these different things, you have to apply yourself in all these different seasons. But it's that constant pressure, like keep going, like put the hand on. I mean, if you maintain a house and if you own a house, you don't get to just have 3 months where you don't do anything to the house. Like you have to constantly be fixing the little things. Otherwise, before you know it, you have 100 little things that have built up because you haven't been diligent.
Yeah.
And to add to this verse here in 10:3, I think it's interesting to see the connection to where it says the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry. There's a connection between those who are living righteous lives and who are being diligent with their hands. Like there's this connection there with like that work and being productive and working is part of the living a righteous life before God. And to me, this verse is also showing that those who seek righteousness are given the means to be able to be productive and to have their needs met because they are ultimately trying to live, do what God wants them to do to live a right life, and part of that is being diligent in your work.
Absolutely. I think a lot of that goes back to what the question that Drew asked is, if we look at this as only a physical proverb to where I'm going to get rich as long as I work hard, and we neglect it, we might have a ton of money in the bank, but we don't have a spiritual relationship with God at all. And we can look at that even from a practical standpoint with our families. I know when I was growing up, my dad worked in the coal mines. He worked hard, worked long shifts, and there were times that I didn't get to see him, but he never made it a point that anytime there was overtime, he was always going to take that. There were times where he would turn down an extra shift and an extra few dollars because he wanted to go to one of my baseball games. And, you know, and nobody knows when they're going to go, but I was 12 years old when my dad found out that he had cancer and passed away. And looking back on it, it would have been easy for him to say, well, I'm gonna put a bunch of money in the bank and we're gonna have the biggest boat and the nicest cars and all of that. But I can look back on my childhood, and when Dad was with me, I knew he made the priority of being with family, and I'm rich in that respect. He worked hard to make sure that there was a balance between I go to work, I provide for my family, but I'm also with them. He went to church. He served as best as he could, and I think that goes to the diligent that we've been talking about, that idea of being diligent, where it takes effort and some real thought to say, I want to work hard, but I also want to spend time with my family, and ultimately, I want everything I do to glorify God. And that takes planning. That doesn't just happen by chance. So I think the hard work should look at several different aspects, spiritually speaking, family, finances, everything that we've talked about and will talk about goes to that. So, would somebody read chapter 13, verse 11? I think this is a good verse for us to kind of wrap.
I can read that.
Yeah.
Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it.
All right.
So get rich quick schemes.
Yeah,
No pyramid scheme. We
No,
can't.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah. How come so many people who get win the lottery? How much of that passes on to their kids?
Yeah. I think the last
Whereas-
statistic that I heard was that people that win more than $1 million and multi-million-dollar lottery winners,
Yeah.
I think it's 30 or 40% file bankruptcy within 5 years.
Yeah.
That was. I'm floored by that.
I recall a farmer that I would hunt on his property, and we would go down to the basement where at the house, the family house, kind of get into our hunting gear, things like that. And there was always hanging up, 4 or 5 pairs of coveralls that are just worn through in the elbows. And you'd pass, his sheds all had, he loved Minneapolis Mullion, the old tractors. And he ran those Minneapolis Mullion, this is like 90s, early 2000s. He's running tractors that are, 60, 70 years old, farming 2,000 acres doing this, that he had built while he was working another job, and now in retirement, like he was farming. And we'd go out hunting, and we'd be like, he'd already be out, he'd already be gone. And I look at that, like he built that slowly over time, paying with cash, and I mean, like the what he's gonna have to pass on is gonna be very significant with that. And I think it goes too, though, that verse 12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. Part of that little by little is the little celebrations that you have on the way, that you don't continually put hope off. I think Dave Ramsey, in his financial teachings, does a good job of that, of the idea that like you're taking those baby steps. When you make it through one, you're like, yeah, and then, but you're not done. Like you okay, next, like have a little celebration and go to the next thing.
Absolutely. I think that, again, along with that diligence, there's this idea of working hard for the right reasons, doing it for the right reasons. This, verse 11 sort of speaks to the fact that like we can work hard to trick people. We can work very hard to do, something that maybe we get a lot of money quick, but there's nothing good that comes from it. And I think it's good for us to know where we're investing our time and energy, and is it profitable, is it godly, or is it fraudulent?
Well, that's it. Yeah, there's plenty of examples of large corporations and companies that hire, whole cadres of people to just find all the loopholes, and they're working hard to find like the ways that they can save a dollar here, there, and everywhere. And yet when you start to look into some of those things, like the sheer like amount of dishonesty and just trickery that goes into that, it kind of galls you.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's something that we need to be aware of. I think it's the hard work, how we work, you know, and the fact that we do work, we're not just, you know, thinking like, well, hey, work is a good thing. We just sort of speak to that. Austin, would you care to read chapter 14, verse 23? I think this is another good verse that I scratched out there that speaks to what we're talking about.
Sure. In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty.
All right, so if we're working, toiling, laboring, doing it well, there's some profit. But if we're just sitting around talking, even if it's good talk, there's nothing that's coming from it.
All right, this has been a good talk. We're gonna go to work. So.
Yeah.
Just kidding. We're gonna do something.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good one to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to me that, you know, I don't want to just shut the conversation down, but to me that it's a great place to leave off with this, is that work is something we should be diligent, we should have a plan, it should be well thought out, but we've got to get out and do it, you know? And it's good for us to talk about it, to think about it, to lay something out. I mean, you know, somebody that's going to build a deck, if they've just installed a pool, somebody that's going to, you know, put in a driveway, there needs to be a plan of what's going to happen, how's it going to happen, when is each section going to get done. But you can plan it out, draw it out, and have all the specs in front of you, but until you go out and you start digging a hole to put those pillars in so that your deck is going to be set, or you start leveling out the driveway so that you can put down whatever it is, you know, material that you're going to use, nothing's going to get done. So we've got to actually, rubber has to meet road. We have got to get on it and start doing something. So I think that is a good place for us to end on. I think that might be one of our shorter ones, but I think it's good because we should probably go out and do something about this now. So we thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week. We're going to be talking about rest, so we invite you back. This will be a lot longer, and we can talk and just kind of lay around. So hopefully next week when we rest, we'll rest together. God bless y'all. Have a great one.